On 10 November 1903, in the Goelet mansion at 608 Fifth Avenue, New York, a young woman pauses midway down the marble staircase to adjust the pearl buttons on her gloves. Outside, carriages clog Fifth Avenue. Inside, the house hums with controlled urgency. Florists thread white roses along the balustrade. A maid smooths the train of a House of Worth gown, whose satin has already appeared in fashion sketches and museum catalogs. From her window, Mary May Goulet can just see the gray stone of St. Thomas's Church, where police have been ordered to contain the crowds gathering to glimpse the richest American heiress of her year, Mary VIII, Duke of Roxburgh. Contemporary reports note that spectators began filling the sidewalks hours earlier. One diary recorded that the wedding caused quite a sensation on the avenue as people pressed against the railings to see her carriage. In the vestibule, a footman offers her a final envelope. She does not open it. She straightens her back, fingers tightening inside the gloves that will soon wave to a mob. The scene is dazzling, enviable, exactingly choreographed. The cost, as always, is written in what she does not say. On a late summer morning in August 1893, sea mist hangs over the lawns of Ochre Court, Newport, Rhode Island, the chateauesque mansion that Ogden and Mary Wilson Goulet have just completed at a reported cost of $4.5 million. The limestone facade catches the early light, all turrets and carved stonework imported from France. Inside, their 14-year-old daughter, Mary May Goelet, walks the long gallery, her gloves slightly too large, instructed to keep her hands still when passing guests. The gallery stretches 70 feet, its walls hung with tapestries that muffle footsteps and conversation alike. Through tall windows, she can see gardeners trimming the south lawn, their movements as choreographed as her own. The house smells of fresh paint, beeswax, and the faint salt carried inland from the Atlantic. Archival records show that Ochre Court required 27 house servants, 8 coachmen and grooms, and 12 gardeners to run a typical 8-week season. The staff lived in separate quarters. Their routines enabled the family's leisure, but remained carefully invisible. Letters between architect Richard Morris Hunt and Ogden Goelet itemized stained glass panels depicting heraldic devices, carved mantels, and extensive garden works, evidence of a house conceived as a backdrop for spectacle rather than intimacy. Newspaper profiles of the Goelet family trace their wealth to vast New York real estate holdings accumulated over 3 generations, making May a visible symbol of a fortune second only to the Astors. Her grandfather's prudent investments in Manhattan property now fund summers in Newport and winters on Fifth Avenue. At afternoon tea, she is taught to receive callers with poised conversation, to remember the connections between families, to leave no silence unfilled. Small talk is not casual. It is diplomacy practiced over teacups. In this world, a child is not simply cherished. She's presented, examined, and judged for fitness to represent the family name. Her education includes music lessons and French grammar, but also training in posture, in how to hold a teacup, in the precise angle at which to tilt her head when greeting elders. She practices her signature on monogram stationery until each loop is identical. The house seems limitless. Turrets, towers, lawns running to the cliff edge where the land drops away to rock and foam below. But her paths are marked out in advance. She will walk the gallery countless times, but always under observation, always with the same corrected stride. Even here, in the abundance of summer and stone, grace is already rehearsal. By February 1892, winter has drawn the family back to 608 Fifth Avenue, New York City, a 5-story townhouse of gray stone whose polished facade is soon photographed as one of the avenue's most prominent addresses. The marble-floored entrance hall smells faintly of coal smoke from the fireplaces, beeswax from the daily polishing of banisters, and hothouse flowers that arrive each morning from the conservatory. Gas chandeliers cast warm light across paneled walls hung with portraits of ancestors whose stern faces suggest the weight of inherited obligation. It is here, in the drawing room overlooking the avenue, that Ward McAllister's famous 400 list is discussed when it appears in the New York Times, naming Ogden and Mary Wilson Goelet among those deemed New York's best families. The list, so called because 400 was the approximate capacity of Mrs. Astor's ballroom, codified a social hierarchy in which May's place is inherited, not chosen. To be included is to possess not merely wealth, but lineage, manners, and the approval of the reigning arbiters of society. A surviving calling card engraved Miss Mary Goelet, preserved today in family papers at the New York Historical Society, is both introduction and boundary. It permits entry to certain doors and bars, access to others. The card is heavy stock, expensive paper with engraved script, a small artifact that carries enormous social weight. When left on a silver tray in the proper household, it signals eligibility. When withheld, it speaks volumes. In the mornings, May practices French phrases with a governess imported from Paris, repeating conjugations and pronunciation until her accent is judged acceptable for presentation abroad. In the afternoons, she is corrected on how to accept a dance card without seeming eager, how to converse with young men without encouraging inappropriate familiarity, how to withdraw from a conversation gracefully when a chaperone signals. The governess's notebook, referenced in later family correspondence, tracked progress not in academic subjects, but in social competencies. Posture improved, still too quick to laugh. The Goulet's social obligations, chronicled weekly in society columns of the Times and Herald, are publicly described as hospitality and duty, but the pattern beneath the language is clear. Visibility is a form of work, and May is already employed. She appears at charity bazaars, music halls, afternoon teas, always dressed appropriately, always demonstrating the cultivation her family's money has purchased. Her childhood is a long audition for a role she cannot refuse. Her name appears in print as part of ultra-fashionable lists, in accounts of who attended which ball, who wore what jewels, who sat at which dinner table, but it appears never in her own words. The public learns the correct spelling of Goelet, memorizes which families are connected by blood or marriage, speculates about her future prospects. It does not learn what she thinks, what she reads when alone, whether she resents or accepts the life being constructed around her. In a letter preserved among Wilson family papers, her mother writes to a sister, May is learning her place beautifully. She will do us credit. The phrasing is telling. Not that May is happy, curious, or thriving, but that she is learning to perform. Credit, in this context, is the currency that matters most. In June 1897, as London celebrates Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee with processions, fireworks, and imperial pageantry, May arrives at Wimborne House, the Goelets' rented London residence near Green Park. The house is smaller than Ochre Court, but its location makes up for lack of scale. 3 blocks from Buckingham Palace, close to the embassies and townhouses where the season's crucial events unfold. From the drawing-room windows, she can hear the rumble of carriages on the cobblestones, the calls of flower sellers, the distant military bands practicing for royal appearances. Contemporary accounts and later scholarship on the Dollar Princess phenomenon note that American heiresses like May were presented at court during these years, their gowns and deportment recorded in fashion reports and society columns, their curtsies observed with interest and some suspicion by British hostesses who viewed them as both curiosity and competition. These young women brought fortunes that could restore crumbling estates, but they also brought American informality, a directness that sometimes clashed with British reserve. In this world, the glove ritual becomes precise and weighted with meaning. White kidskin, buttoned to the wrist with tiny pearl fastenings, removed only at the exact moment of presentation before the Queen. Etiquette manuals of the period dedicate entire chapters to court presentation, detailing the approved fabrics, silk, satin, or velvet, the required train, at least 3 yards, the ostrich feather headdress, and the depth of the curtsy, a backward glide while bowing low, requiring weeks of practice to execute without stumbling. May was presented to the Queen in 1897, as confirmed by both court records and family letters, likely wearing a House of Worth gown similar to the surviving 1895 satin and tulle dress now attributed to her in museum and fashion archives. The dress, photographed in collections, shows intricate beadwork and a bodice so tightly constructed that movement was difficult, breath came shallow, and the wearer existed primarily as a visual creation rather than a physical person. Fashion historians note that such gowns were designed to be seen from a distance, under candlelight, moving slowly, costumes for performance, not comfort. Behind the splendor lies calculation that may or may not fully grasp at 16. Her mother belongs to the marrying Wilsons, a family noted for strategic alliances with European titles in American dynasties. May's aunt married a Vanderbilt. Another cousin is being groomed for presentation to Italian nobility. Each perfected curtsy, each measured smile across a ballroom, each carefully orchestrated introduction serves an unspoken purpose: to demonstrate that American money can learn British manners, that a fortune can be made respectable through the acquisition of grace. During the Jubilee season, May attends garden parties at Buckingham Palace, a royal opera performance at Covent Garden, and dinners at great houses where titles stretch back to the Norman conquest. She is seated beside younger sons and heirs, and the conversations follow prescribed patterns: compliments about the weather, inquiries about travel, observations about music. Nothing is said directly, but much is conveyed through seating arrangements, through who speaks to whom, through invitations extended or withheld. She is applauded for her grace, her poise, the elegance with which she navigates a world far more rigid and formal than even New York society. But the room, the vast networks of aristocratic families watching, calculating, weighing American dollars against British bloodlines, is watching something larger than a girl. It is watching a fortune curtsy, measuring whether this particular American investment in European prestige will yield appropriate social returns. On a gray morning in March 1894, down the length of Ochre Court's long gallery, the echo is not of music or conversation, but of corrected footsteps on parquet floors. A private tutor, identified in household accounts only as Miss Aldrich, asks May to walk the length of the room again, this time with gloves folded lightly over a book balanced on her head, so her posture will remain perfectly straight and her hands will not fidget or gesture. The exercise is repeated until the book no longer wobbles, until each step is identical, until movement becomes both unconscious and controlled. Through the tall windows, March light filters cold and clear across the surfaces of occasional tables, marble busts, and the ever-present flowers arranged by staff who work before the family wakes. While specific school records for May remain sparse, such documents were not always preserved by wealthy families who educated daughters at home. Girls of her circle were typically educated through a combination of resident governesses, European travel, and short periods at elite institutions such as Miss Porter's School in Farmington, Connecticut, or similar establishments in New York and Boston. The curricula at these schools combined traditional academic subjects with what were delicately termed social skills: how to preside over a dinner table, how to arrange flowers, how to manage servants, how to make visitors feel welcome while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Surviving guidebooks and etiquette manuals from the 1890s stress posture, deportment, and the art of receiving guests as core subjects equal in importance to French grammar or piano technique. One manual, The Gentlewoman's Book of Etiquette, 1892, devotes 40 pages to calling card protocols alone. Another provides diagrams showing proper walking stance, shoulders back, chin level, hands clasped lightly, steps neither too long nor too short, the whole body moving as a single graceful unit. In Goelet family papers held at various archives, bills for music lessons and French tutors sit beside invoices for conservatory orchids, imported lace, and the bindery work on leather-bound books for the library. Education, for May, is a choreography of refinement rather than an exploration of ideas or alternatives. There is no evidence she attended a formal academy for any extended period. Instead, her schoolroom was the drawing room, the ballroom, the gallery where she now practices walking. Her mother supervises these lessons personally, correcting not just posture, but also expression. A diary entry from a visiting cousin, preserved in the Vanderbilt family papers, Notes: Aunt Mary is quite particular about May's training. Every gesture is observed. The child is patient, but one wonders what she thinks while performing these endless little rituals. What May thinks is unrecorded. If she kept a diary in these years, it has not survived. The archive preserves her dancing master's account books, her music teacher's progress reports, adequate technique, lacks passion, and her mother's correspondence with other society matrons comparing educational approaches. It does not preserve May's voice. Every hour of her day is accounted for, not by examinations that test knowledge, but by expectations that require performance. Breakfast at 8, French lessons at 9, piano practice at 10, correspondence and penmanship at 11, luncheon with correct placement of silver and napkin, afternoon rest, needlework or drawing, preparation for evening appearances. The structure never varies. The lessons teach her less what to think than how to appear. Collected, pleasant, accomplished without being threatening, decorative without being frivolous. It is called education, but it might more accurately be termed training in controlled visibility. She is learning to be watched, to be displayed, to exist as evidence of her family's success in transforming money into something the old families of New York and London might grudgingly accept as equal. The book balanced on her head is not meant to teach her anything. It is meant to ensure she becomes something. By spring 1895, in Paris, May stands in the salon of the House of Worth at 7 Rue de la Paix. The couturier who has dressed Empress Eugénie, Queen Victoria's daughters, and every fashionable woman with sufficient money and social standing to pass his personal inspection. The salon is hushed, thickly carpeted, its walls hung with silk in shades of cream and gold. Assistants move silently between fitting rooms, carrying swaths of fabric, boxes of trimming, trays of buttons that catch the light, a surviving ball gown from her estate, cream satin overlaid with turquoise ribbons, layers of tulle, countless sequins, glass beads sewn individually by hand, shows just how heavily elegance could rest on a young woman's shoulders, both literally and figuratively. The dress, now preserved in private collections and documented in fashion history exhibitions, weighs several kilograms even without the additional jewels she would have worn. Order books from the House of Worth, partially preserved in fashion archives, describe the bodice as tightly boned with whalebone stays, the waist compressed to the fashionable ideal of 18 to 20 inches, the skirt bell-shaped and supported by layers of horsehair, crinoline, and petticoats. The dress was designed to move perfectly under gaslight. Candlelight and early electric bulbs created specific lighting conditions that fabric had to complement. The construction ensured that the wearer could sit only at the edge of a chair, could not raise her arms above shoulder height, and would tire after a few hours of standing. The weight of the dress, distributed across shoulders, waist, and hips, would have made each staircase descent a carefully managed performance requiring practice. One fashion historian notes that wealthy women in this period often had staff members wear their new gowns around servants' quarters for several hours to break them in, to soften the boning and fabric so that the wearer's first public appearance would not be marked by visible discomfort. Here, in Worth's fitting rooms, the gloves are adjusted yet again, matching the gown in color and texture, fastened with buttons that must align perfectly, signaling correctness and attention to detail. The gloves themselves are custom-made, measured to her hands, the kidskin so fine it shows the shape of her fingernails beneath. Fashion columns in both New York and London followed such gowns with the attention contemporary media gives to diplomatic summits, describing Miss Goelet's costume in exhaustive detail. The shade of satin, the source of the lace, the jewels selected to complement the overall effect. Clothing becomes archive. We know her measurements: bust, waist, hip, arm-length shoe size, more precisely than we know her opinions on books, music, politics, or any subject that might reveal an interior life. Her mother sits in the salon's viewing area, comparing fabric samples, discussing the social calendar with Worth's senior assistant. The conversation is practical. This gown for the opera, that one for the spring ball season, another for presentation if needed. Each dress cost more than an American working family might earn in 10 years. But for the Godelets, the expense is strategic rather than frivolous. The right appearance grants access. The wrong one closes doors. As May stands on the fitting platform, arms outstretched while assistants pin and adjust, she can see her reflection multiplied in the gilt mirrors surrounding her. The image is striking, a young woman transformed into an object of beauty, a mobile work of art. But the mirrors also reveal something else: the effort required to maintain the illusion, the pins holding everything in place, the assistants whose labor makes effortless elegance possible. The gown survives today in museum photography and private collections, studied by fashion historians, displayed behind velvet ropes, referenced in academic papers about Gilded Age aesthetics and the transatlantic elite. It has outlasted the woman who wore it, outlasted the occasions for which it was created, outlasted the entire social world it represented. Silk and sequins and meticulous craftsmanship outlast intention, memory, voice. In August 1887, off Cowes on the Isle of Wight, where the British aristocracy and American wealthy gather for the annual yachting regatta, Ogden Goelet dies aboard his yacht Mayflower. He is 54. The cause, reported in various sources, is attributed to nervous strain and worry. A New York Times obituary, published days later, notes carefully that he had worried considerably over family affairs, particularly the proposed marriage of his daughter to the Duke of Manchester. That proposed match to the Duke of Manchester never materialized, whether because of Ogden's objections, the Duke's financial difficulties, or May's own reluctance is not recorded in surviving documents, but its documentation in the Times obituary reveals the pressure surrounding May's future, the way her marriage prospects were discussed not as private family matters, but as public transactions subject to newspaper speculation and paternal anxiety. The Duke of Manchester, like many British peers in the 1890s, was seeking an American heiress to restore his family's depleted finances. British landowners, facing declining agricultural incomes as grain imports from America and Russia undercut domestic production, increasingly looked to transatlantic marriages as financial rescue. American families, in turn, sought the social prestige and access to royal circles that, a British title could provide. It was a market, and everyone involved understood the terms. After Ogden's death, his widow Mary Wilson Goelet inherits control of the fortune and, with it, control over her daughter's future. The family spends the next months in formal mourning, black clothes, limited social appearances, withdrawn from the public eye. Yet, even in mourning, the machinery of marriage negotiation continues to operate. British peers in need of cash were watching. American and British newspapers alike debated which duke or which debt-laden estate would secure the Goelet dowry, estimated variously between $10 and $20 million. In New York, formal mourning limits May's public appearances, yet suitors and their families continue to circulate as names on visiting lists and dinner seating plans communicated through intermediaries. Calling cards still arrive. Invitations are extended with appropriate expressions of sympathy. The social calendar adjusts its pace but does not stop. Her gloves, now black for mourning as etiquette requires, are still corrected for fit before she enters a drawing room. The rituals continue, only the color has changed. Black gloves, black dress, black ribbons. The vocabulary of loss is prescribed down to the smallest detail, governed by rules about how long to mourn, when lighter colors can be reintroduced, which social events are permissible and which are not. Contemporary etiquette manuals outline mourning protocols with precision. Full mourning for a parent required 1 year of black, followed by 6 months of half mourning in gray or lavender, before a gradual return to normal dress. During full mourning, jewelry was limited to jet or black enamel. Social appearances were constrained, and any hint of frivolity was deemed inappropriate. For May, this means another year of waiting, another year of being 17 and then 18 while her future is discussed by others, negotiated through intermediaries, shaped by calculations in which she has no official voice. Letters from this period, preserved in various family archives, show her mother corresponding with relatives about May's situation, about which suitors remain viable options. about the proper timing for re-entry into society. Even grief is filtered through etiquette, formalized into gestures and garments that can be observed and judged. The loss of a parent, a relationship about which we have almost no direct evidence in May's case, becomes another column inch in which her value is measured by whom she might eventually marry, by how well she performs mourning, by whether she emerges from this period with her reputation and prospects intact. The private experience of losing her father, if May grieved genuinely or felt relief or numbness, remains unrecorded. What survives is the public performance, the black gloves, the withdrawn appearances, the careful navigation of social rules that transform personal loss into another opportunity to demonstrate proper breeding. On a chilly day in January 1899, during the London social season that runs from late autumn through early summer, May sits in the drawing room at Wimborne House, being gently drilled by her mother and Lady Pemberton, an English friend of the family whose role seems to be instructing American heiresses in the finer points of British aristocratic conversation. The topics considered safe and appropriate for a duke's dinner table are horses and hunting, country houses and their histories, music, especially opera, the latest court appearances and royal engagements, European travel, and charitable works. The topics to be avoided are equally clear: politics, religion, money, except in the most oblique terms, scandal, and anything that might be construed as controversy or strong personal opinion. American directness, the tendency to speak one's mind or ask direct questions, must be softened into British indirection, where meaning is conveyed through tone and implication, rather than explicit statement. Studies of elite finishing education in this period, documented in memoirs and contemporary pedagogical writings, emphasize conversation as perhaps the most crucial skill a young woman could possess. She was expected to sustain light, intelligent talk on a variety of subjects without ever dominating the conversation, expressing controversial views, or revealing anything that might be judged as excessive knowledge or intellectual ambition. The goal was to make others comfortable, to draw out reticent guests, to smooth over awkward moments. Letters among the extended Wilson and Vanderbilt relatives, preserved in various family collections, mention French lessons, piano practice, and the careful cultivation of charm in their daughters. One letter from Alva Vanderbilt to Mary Wilson Goelet discusses the importance of teaching girls to shine without glaring, to be memorable without being threatening, accomplished without being competitive. May writes thank you notes on heavy cream paper, monogrammed with the Goelet crest, each line readable as both politeness and strategy. A preserved example of similar correspondence from her Vanderbilt relative speaks in the same restrained phrases. "So kind of you to think of us. It was such a pleasure to see you. Hoping our paths cross again soon." The language is formulaic, pleasant, empty of specific content or genuine emotion. Lady Pemberton corrects May's tendency to answer questions too directly. When asked about her impressions of London, May apparently responds with specific observations about the fog, the coal smoke, the noise. "Too particular, my dear," Lady Pemberton notes. One says, "I find it enchanting," and leaves it at that. Let them ask for more detail if they wish it. The lesson is clear. Volunteering information suggests eagerness. Showing expertise suggests unfeminine intellectualism. Expressing strong preferences suggests stubbornness. Better to be pleasant, vague, agreeable, a mirror that reflects others' expectations back to them. During these weeks, May also receives instruction in more subtle arts: how to signal to a servant without obvious gestures, how to end a visit without giving offense, how to discourage unwanted attention from a suitor without creating awkwardness, how to navigate the complex hierarchies of British aristocracy where a duke outranks an earl who outranks a viscount in ways that must be reflected in seating arrangements, order of precedence, and countless tiny social calculations. The drawing room at Wimborne House becomes a classroom where every interaction is analyzed afterward, every conversation dissected for errors. May's natural warmth, her American habit of smiling easily and asking questions, must be tempered without being extinguished entirely. The goal is to seem approachable, but not common, friendly, but not forward. In the evenings, she practices at small dinners arranged by her mother, where she is seated beside eligible young men whose families have been vetted, whose financial situations are known, whose interest in an American alliance has been confirmed through intermediary channels. She discusses the weather, the opera, mutual acquaintances. She does not discuss herself. The content of the conversation matters less than its ease, its flow, the way it demonstrates social competence. She is trained not only to speak, but to smooth, to make others comfortable, to reduce friction, to ensure that everyone leaves thinking well of the Goelets, and, by extension, thinking of May as a possible addition to their family. It is performance, but performance so thorough it must eventually become natural, automatic, indistinguishable from genuine personality. By June 1897, and again in subsequent London seasons through 1902, Henry John Innes Kerr, 8th Duke of Roxburgh, moves in the same overlapping circles of court society as May Goelet. Both attend the Queen's Diamond Jubilee celebrations in 1897. A modern reconstruction of their relationship, based on society columns and family records, notes that they likely met at a Jubilee garden party at Buckingham Palace, though no contemporary source records the exact moment of introduction. The Duke brings an ancient title. The Dukedom of Roxburgh was created in 1707, and Flore's Castle, a 60,000-acre Scottish estate with a house dating to the 1720s. He also brings debts, declining agricultural revenues, and the need to modernize an estate that has been in his family for generations. He is, by all accounts, a gentleman, educated at Eton and Oxford, interested in horses and hunting, well regarded in court circles, conventional in his views and habits. May brings one of the largest private fortunes of her generation, estimated at the time to be between $10 and $20 million. Accounts vary, but even the lower figure represents extraordinary wealth. She also brings American energy, a certain informality, and the expectation that her money will be respected, rather than simply absorbed into aristocratic complacency. Contemporary diaries and memoirs from the period describe these initial encounters between American heiresses and British peers as both social and financial negotiations, where mothers and chaperones watched conversations closely from strategic positions behind fans and tea services. Every dance at a ball, every turn in a garden, every exchange at a dinner table was observed and later analyzed for signs of mutual interest or incompatibility. Lady Randolph Churchill, herself an American who married British aristocracy, wrote in her memoirs about the scrutiny such young women faced. They are examined like horses at auction, their teeth counted, their fortunes estimated to the dollar, their manners judged against impossible standards, and yet they must appear delighted by the attention. For May, crossing the palace lawn at that first garden party, gloves pristine despite the damp grass, dress carefully chosen to suggest wealth without ostentation, the stakes are invisible but enormous. A misstep might cost not only a particular match but her entire reputation in British society. Too forward, and she confirms prejudices about American brashness. Too retiring, and she fails to distinguish herself from dozens of other wealthy young women seeking similar alliances. The Duke, for his part, must balance his estate's financial needs against his personal standards. He cannot simply marry money. He must marry money attached to a woman who will reflect well on his family, navigate aristocratic society successfully, and produce an heir to continue the line. The pressure is mutual, though expressed differently. Over the following years, 1898, 1899, 1900, 1901, 1902, they encounter each other repeatedly, at Royal Ascot, at country house parties, at London receptions. The courtship, if it can be called that, unfolds across years and continents, mediated by family members, conducted through formal visits and carefully orchestrated encounters. There is no evidence of romantic letters, passionate declarations, or anything resembling the courtship narratives popularized in novels. What emerges instead is a negotiation, his need for money and her need for position converging into an arrangement that serves both families' interests. Whether affection developed alongside or despite these calculations, the historical record does not clearly reveal. Later accounts from Flore's castle emphasize mutual respect and eventual fondness. Contemporary observers noted that May seemed sensible and the Duke fortunate, language that praises practicality rather than passion. As negotiations progress, meetings become more frequent and less chaperoned. By 1902, they are walking in gardens together, conversing at length, testing compatibility. May's French is useful here. So are her piano skills, her equestrian abilities learned at Newport, her demonstrated capacity to manage household staff and entertain with appropriate grace. The meeting that history will remember as a garden party was actually the beginning of a transaction that saved a castle from decline and redirected an American fortune permanently across the Atlantic. Both sides understood this. The question was never whether it was a transaction, but whether it was a fair one, and whether the people involved could make a life within its terms. On 3 September 1903, newspapers on both sides of the Atlantic report the engagement of Miss Mary Goelet to His Grace the Duke of Roxburgh, confirming what had already been whispered in Newport drawing rooms and London clubs for several weeks. The New York Times devotes significant column space to the announcement, noting that the Duke is currently Mrs. Goelet's guest in Newport and that a New York wedding is expected in November. An Indiana newspaper repeats the announcement in its society pages, calling May one of the wealthiest American heiresses of her generation, and underscoring the transatlantic attention the match commands even in smaller cities far from New York's social epicenter. From Newport to London to Scottish newspapers that will soon celebrate the marriage as a rescue of one of Scotland's great estates. The story circulates with remarkable speed. Engagement gifts begin arriving almost immediately, recorded in ledgers that track provenance and obligation. Silver from the Vanderbilts, porcelain from relatives in London, jewels from family friends. The gifts are cataloged down to the jewelers' names and estimated values, creating an archive of objects that will follow May into her new life. Yet the emotional content of May's own response to the engagement, relief, resignation, genuine affection, or some mixture of all three, is absent from these records. Later accounts from Flore's castle, particularly those written after May's death, emphasize mutual affection and describe the marriage as a love match. Tour guides at the castle today speak of the Duke and Duchess's partnership, their shared commitment to preserving the estate, their eventual devotion to their son. These narratives are not necessarily false, but they are shaped by a desire to see the marriage in romantic terms. Academic discussions of dollar princesses and the broader pattern of transatlantic marriages stress the transactional nature of such unions, money exchanged for title, American wealth for British rank, while acknowledging that many couples made successful partnerships within these constraints. The arrangement and affection were not mutually exclusive. Duty could coexist with, and sometimes evolve into, genuine attachment. In Newport, during the weeks following the announcement, May writes note after note, acceptances of congratulations, acknowledgments of gifts, arrangements for the wedding. Her gloved hand remains steady over each looping signature on monogrammed stationery. The engagement has turned her life into public property more thoroughly than any 400 list or society column ever did. She is no longer simply Miss Goelet. She is now the future Duchess of Roxburgh, a transformation in identity that precedes the actual marriage by months. Local newspapers publish sketches of Ochre Court and descriptions of the Duke's visits. Curious onlookers gather outside the estate gates hoping for glimpses of the couple. The wedding becomes a topic of conversation in parlors and at dinner tables across several continents. Everyone, it seems, has an opinion about whether American money should buy British titles, whether the match is appropriate, whether May is making a wise choice. What May herself thinks remains elusive. She gives no interviews. She writes no essays or letters that survive in public archives, expressing her feelings about marriage, duty, or her future. The documents of the engagement record everything except hesitation, doubt, or private conflict. What survives are financial figures meticulously tracked, guest lists carefully constructed, transportation arrangements coordinated across ocean and continent, and endless descriptions of the dress, the flowers, the church, the reception. The silence at the center of all this documentation is striking. May's voice, what she wants, fears, hopes, does not enter the historical record. Perhaps she had no doubts. Perhaps she was genuinely pleased to secure such a match, to fulfill her family's expectations while gaining position and respect in British society. Or perhaps she had learned so thoroughly to keep private thoughts private that even her most intimate letters reveal nothing. One fragment survives in a letter from her cousin. May seems calm about it all, as if she always expected this. The phrasing suggests acceptance rather than enthusiasm, a recognition that this outcome was inevitable given her wealth, her family's ambitions, and the narrow range of options available to women of her class. Calm in this context might mean many things: peace, resignation, careful control of emotion, or simply the successful internalization of years of training in how to appear. On the afternoon of 10 November 1903, St. Thomas's Church on Fifth Avenue becomes the focus of a spectacle that exceeds even the elaborate weddings society New York has witnessed in recent years. Contemporary reports and personal diaries describe crowds massing on the sidewalks hours before the ceremony, police struggling to maintain order, and women surging forward to glimpse the bride as her carriage arrives. One New York newspaper summarized the scene with stark simplicity. Women mob her carriage. The church itself is filled with white roses, thousands of them according to florist records, arranged to line the pews, garland the altar, and frame the entrance. Inside, decorations were reportedly designed by a fashionable designer to make the vast Gothic interior feel more intimate, an attempt at creating warmth within what had become a celebrity spectacle. The effect, according to those present, was both beautiful and overwhelming. Too many flowers, too much white silk, too many guests pressed into pews meant for a smaller gathering. May walks up the aisle in a cloud of lace and veil, the details of her gown and jewels carefully recorded in multiple society columns over subsequent days. The dress, created by the House of Worth, features a high-necked bodice of Duchess satin with pearl embroidery, a skirt of silk and lace with a train that requires 2 attendants to manage, and a veil of antique Brussels lace said to have been worn by multiple generations of European nobility. On her head sits a small diamond tiara, a gift from the Duke. Around her neck, a pearl necklace with a clasp of diamonds and sapphires. Her gloves are almost invisible in the photographs that survive, thin kid skin dyed to match the dress perfectly, barely visible against her skin. Yet they are there, as they have been at every significant moment, thin membrane between skin and the hands she shakes, between self and performance, between the private person and the public role. For the assembled guests, 400 according to official counts, representing the overlapping elites of New York, Newport, and visiting British aristocracy, the wedding completes a story of fortune meets title. For the newspapers, it confirms the transatlantic marriage market's continuing vitality, despite criticism from both American commentators who dislike seeing fortunes leave the country and British observers who resent American money buying access to their aristocracy. For May, standing at the altar beside the Duke, the ceremony marks the moment when private decisions, family negotiations, and years of preparation become irrevocably public and binding. The crowd outside, cheering and straining for a view, functions almost like the metaphorical locked door of legend. There is no turning back through that threshold without scandal, social ruin, and family disgrace. The performance must continue to its conclusion. After the ceremony, the reception at the Goelet mansion is elegant and controlled, in stark contrast to the chaos outside. Champagne is served in crystal. The wedding cake, described in multiple accounts as a towering confection of sugar and marzipan, stands as centerpiece. Toasts are offered praising the union, the families, the promising future. The Duke speaks briefly, thanking the Goulets for their hospitality and expressing hope for happiness. May says nothing publicly. Brides in this era were not expected to speak at their own weddings. By evening, the couple departs for a brief stay in the city before sailing to Europe. As their carriage pulls away from the mansion, crowds still linger, hoping for one more glimpse. Some wave handkerchiefs. Others simply stare. A few, according to newspaper reports, weep, whether from emotion, excitement, or the sheer theatrical drama of it all is impossible to determine. In the archives, the wedding is preserved through multiple forms of documentation: newspaper, accounts, florist bills, the marriage license, photographs of the church and guests, later reminiscences by attendees. Each source adds detail: the exact count of roses, the names of prominent guests, the origin of the lace on her veil, the weather that day, clear and cold. Together, they create a comprehensive record of the event as public spectacle. What they do not preserve is any sense of May's interior experience, what she felt walking that aisle, whether she was confident or terrified, whether she believed she was making the right choice or simply fulfilling an inevitable obligation. The archive preserves the sound of the crowd more clearly than any inner voice. History hears the roar of Fifth Avenue. It does not hear her whisper, if she whispered at all. By 1905, May is firmly installed at Flore's Castle in Kelso, Scottish borders, a massive Georgian pile sitting on a rise above the River Tweed. The approach to the house covers nearly a mile, winding through parkland where deer graze and ancient oaks frame views of the Cheviot Hills in the distance. The castle itself, actually more of a grand country house despite its name, was designed by William Adam in the 1720s and expanded throughout the 19th century into a complex of towers, turrets, and formal wings. Contemporary accounts from the castle and newspapers on both sides of the Atlantic agree that May's dowry, most commonly cited as $20 million, though estimates vary, funded extensive redecorations that transformed the austere Scottish interiors into something more comfortable and more closely aligned with the opulence May had known in Newport and New York. The scale of the renovation was substantial enough to be noted in architectural journals and society pages alike. She brought with her from America an art collection, including 17th century Gobelins tapestries, now hanging in the castle's drawing rooms, where they remain today as part of the estate's permanent collection. These tapestries, depicting classical scenes with extraordinary detail, had been purchased by her father in Paris years earlier. They represent both her American fortune and her family's cultivation of European taste. May personally supervised changes to the principal rooms, introducing more comfortable furniture, modernizing the plumbing and heating systems, creating guest rooms that met standards of hospitality she had learned in her mother's houses. Letters from early visitors, preserved in various memoirs, describe the castle as newly welcoming, with American efficiency softening Scottish grandeur without overwhelming it. The work was delicate. She could not simply impose American taste on a Scottish castle with centuries of history and pride. She had to learn the house's rhythms, understand its significance to the local community, respect traditions while gently introducing improvements. The coal fires that barely heated rooms in winter were supplemented with better circulation systems. The kitchens were updated with modern ranges. The gardens were expanded with plantings that could survive Scottish weather. Gradually, Flore's Castle became known for its hospitality. May and the Duke entertained frequently, hosting shooting parties in autumn, garden parties in summer, and dinners that brought together Scottish neighbors and visiting aristocrats. Visitors' memoirs from the Edwardian period remember her as a gracious hostess, always attentive to guests' comfort, skilled at managing a large household, and increasingly confident in her role as Duchess. She also became involved in local charitable work, expected of aristocratic women but apparently pursued with genuine interest. She supported schools, contributed to relief funds, visited tenants' families, and participated in the public life of the estate in ways that gradually earned respect from a community initially skeptical of an American duchess. Her relationship with King Edward VII and later King George V and Queen Mary is documented in court records and photographs from royal visits. She and the Duke were frequently at Balmoral Castle in Scotland and occasionally at Windsor, close enough to the royal circle to be considered intimates. Later obituaries would describe her as a close friend of the royal family. language that indicates significant social achievement. Yet, Fleur's castle, for all its grandeur and beauty, is also a form of isolation compared with the interconnected social world of Fifth Avenue and Newport. The nearest village, Kelso, is small. Edinburgh is an hour away by carriage or early automobile. London requires a long train journey. The Scottish borders, while beautiful, are remote, especially in winter when roads become difficult and the house sits wrapped in fog and cold. The gloves she adjusts before descending the castle's grand staircase for dinner with neighboring families now symbolize rank secured rather than status pursued. They represent accomplishment. She has successfully made the transition from American heiress to British duchess. But they also signal the narrowing of her world into one estate, one role, one set of obligations from which there is no easy departure. Her life has acquired permanence and purpose. She is no longer being prepared for something. She is now executing the role for which she was prepared. Whether this feels like achievement, confinement, or some complex mixture of both is something the historical record cannot reveal. She writes letters, manages the household, entertains guests, maintains relationships with family in America, and gradually becomes not May Goelet, but the Duchess of Roxburgh. The rescue and the confinement are the same act. Her money saved the castle from decline and decay. The castle, in turn, fixed the shape of her life into a pattern that will continue, with variations, for more than 3 decades. On 7 September 1913, after a decade of childless marriage that had begun to fuel speculation about the succession, May gives birth at Fleur's Castle to George Victor, Robert John Innes Kerr, future 9th Duke of Roxburgh. The birth is announced in newspapers across Britain and America, marked as significant not just for the family, but for the estate and title itself. An heir secures the dukedom's future and justifies, in the eyes of observers, the entire transatlantic alliance. Contemporary accounts describe relief and celebration. Scottish tenants mark the occasion with bonfires. Telegrams of congratulation arrive from royal family members, from relatives in America, from the network of aristocratic families connected by blood and alliance to the Roxburgh line. The birth is proof that the marriage and the infusion of American money has succeeded in its dynastic purpose. May, now 34, had waited years for this. Whether the delay was due to medical difficulties, personal choice, or simple chance is not documented. What is clear is that the birth of an heir transformed her position from that of a wealthy American who married into British aristocracy to that of a duchess who has fulfilled the fundamental obligation of her role, ensuring continuity. Just a year later, in August 1914, Europe descends into war. The Duke serves with a Scottish regiment, is wounded in 1915, and returns to Britain to recover. The rhythms of aristocratic life change dramatically. Country houses are partly repurposed as hospitals or military headquarters. Servants enlist or take war work. Economies tighten as agricultural labor becomes scarce and food supplies are rationed. Fleur's Castle adapts. May oversees the transformation of portions of the house for war-related purposes, manages the estate with reduced staff, and participates in war relief efforts. A 1916 photograph shows her in Red Cross uniform at a charity event, the image striking for how little she resembles the young woman in Worth gowns who appeared in society columns 2 decades earlier. She looks older, more serious, more substantial, a woman with responsibilities rather than a girl being groomed for them. Yet, as a 1929 New York Times article later noted, May's fortune, supplemented by a 1916 inheritance of approximately $3 million from her mother's estate, continues to underpin Roxburgh finances even as war disrupts the British economy. The money that bought her entry into British aristocracy now helps sustain that aristocracy through crisis. After the war, the world May entered in 1903 no longer fully exists. Taxes increase dramatically. Death duties threaten estates. The rigid social hierarchies that structured Edwardian life begin to loosen as women gain more independence, younger generations question old assumptions, and American influence grows stronger. Many great houses close or are sold. Families that survived on rent from agricultural land struggle as farming continues to decline. Flore's castle survives, substantially because of May's continuing financial support. She and the Duke adapt to the new era. Fewer servants, less entertaining, more emphasis on efficient estate management rather than pure display. But they maintain their position in Scottish society and their connection to the royal family. At Windsor garden parties in the 1920s, photographs show May in carefully chosen gowns that reflect post-war fashion while maintaining dignified elegance. Her hands are still covered by gloves, now shorter, less restrictive, but still present, as she greets King George V and Queen Mary. She has become the exemplar of what the Dollar Princess experiment was supposed to achieve, an American-funded, British-styled continuity that bridges old world and new. Her son George grows up at Flore's castle, educated at Eton and Oxford like his father, trained for eventual inheritance. Photographs from the 1920s and early 1930s show him with his parents at various estate events, learning the same role his father learned, perpetuating the line his mother's fortune preserved. By the mid-1930s, May is in her 50s, a dowager in all but name, even before the Duke's death. She has lived half her life in Scotland, far longer than she lived in America. Her accent has softened, taking on slight British inflections. Her habits are those of a Scottish aristocrat rather than a Newport heiress. She moves between Flore's castle and London, maintains correspondence with American relatives who now seem increasingly distant, and occupies a position of respect in a social world very different from the one she entered. The world outside her immediate circle has been radically altered by war, economic change, and social transformation. But within the particular sphere of British aristocracy, the forms endure. Titles are still inherited. Estates are still maintained. The rituals of presentation and precedence continue, though with less rigidity and certainty than before. Refinement survives war more easily than certainty does. On 26 April 1937, May dies in London at age 57. Obituaries in both British and American newspapers remember her as the Dowager Duchess of Roxburgh, friend of the royal family, generous supporter of Scottish causes, and, almost as an afterthought, the American heiress whose fortune essentially founded the modern Roxburgh estate. A New York Times article some years later states it more bluntly. The Roxburgh estate was founded by money of an American heiress. The obituaries, as is typical, focus on accomplishments and social position rather than interior life. They list her charitable works, her proximity to royalty, her role in preserving Flore's castle. They mention her son and the successful continuation of the line. They do not mention what she thought about the life she lived, whether she felt she made the right choices, whether she experienced her marriage as fulfillment or duty, or something more complex than either word suggests. She is buried in Scotland, at Flore's castle, not in the Goelet family plot in New York. Even in death, her identity is fixed. She belonged to Roxburgh, to Scotland, to the role she assumed at 24 and inhabited for more than 3 decades. The American heiress has been permanently transformed into a British duchess, so thoroughly that her origins become merely biographical detail. In 1947, a decade after May's death, her brother Robert Goelet donates Ochre Court to the Sisters of Mercy for the creation of Salve Regina College, transforming the private summer stage where May learned to perform grace into an educational institution. The Newport Ballroom, where she once practiced posture, now hosts examinations and graduations. The Long Gallery, where she walked with books balanced on her head, now sees students hurrying between classes. The mansion built to display wealth becomes a place devoted to education and opportunity. The transformation is both ironic and fitting. The house that prepared May for a life of constrained elegance now offers other women chances May never had. To study freely, to choose professions, to build lives not entirely determined by family fortune and social expectation. Whether Robert Goelet intended this symbolic reversal or simply saw a practical way to dispose of an expensive property is not recorded. In museum photographs and fashion history exhibitions, one of May's House of Worth gowns remains, conserved behind climate-controlled glass in private collections. Fashion historians study the construction, the beadwork, the evidence of how wealthy women dressed in the 1890s. The gown appears in books about Gilded Age fashion, in documentaries about transatlantic society, in exhibitions examining the dollar princess phenomenon. At Flore's Castle, now open to tourists for part of each year, her Gobelins tapestries still hang in the drawing room, catching Scottish light that filters through tall windows. Tour guides mention her name, explain her American origins, describe the renovations her fortune funded. Visitors photograph the rooms, admire the tapestries, and learn a sanitized version of the story. Wealthy American girl marries British duke, lives happily ever after in a castle. Somewhere in archives, among surviving possessions cataloged and preserved, photographs showing her at various ages, monogram linens stored in tissue, silver tea services marked with intertwined initials, perhaps a pair of worn gloves that someone thought worth keeping. Traces of daily gesture persist. These objects speak wordlessly of a life spent performing grace within carefully drawn lines, of rituals repeated so often they became automatic, of small artifacts that outlast the person who used them. What survives is the public record, dates and places, financial figures, guest lists, photographs showing a woman who looks composed and appropriate at every age. What does not survive is the private voice, if it ever existed in forms she felt safe expressing. Her letters are formal, her recorded words are conventional, her thoughts about her own life remain largely unspoken in any documents available to historians. Perhaps she was content. Perhaps the life she lived felt like success rather than constraint. Perhaps she found satisfaction in preserving a great estate, raising her son, occupying a position of respect and influence in British society. The sources do not tell us, and projecting emotions onto her based on modern assumptions about autonomy and choice risk creating a fiction rather than understanding a reality. Or perhaps she felt the weight of the gloves every day, the constant performance, the narrowing of possibility into single path. Perhaps she wondered occasionally what other life might have been possible if she had been born without wealth, without the obligation to serve as vehicle for family ambition and transatlantic alliance. The rooms are no longer hers. Ochre Court belongs to a college, Flore's Castle to later generations of the family she married into. But the choreography she learned, how to stand, how to smile, how to conceal doubt or dissatisfaction or unauthorized feeling, still shapes how we picture women of her class and era. The portrait endures, perfect and impenetrable. The person inside it remains partly locked away. Her interior life a matter of speculation rather than record. The silence, finally, is the most complete documentation we have.